today is the destruction and the loss of life that's happened as a result of those tornadoes in Kentucky and the surrounding states today. It's just horrible, and there's so many needs there. And I'm sure that there's many other people whose hearts are just wrenched by it and would like to help. And I encourage everybody to find a way to help if they can. But saying that is when we do have these heart-wrenching moments, there is a lot of opportunity for people to jump in and collect money on behalf of this tragedy and run away with it. So I think that what we do here at give.org and Give Safely is to provide some tools that people can use when they make those decisions to give and where to give.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Bennett Weiner, our COO, he put out, I guess, an update on our website called Donation Tips for Tornado Relief. And we've distributed that to the BBBs across the country, obviously, but especially in the affected areas. And it goes through a few tips on how to think about supporting the cause, and different ways of thinking about it, supporting. And then there's also a list of BBB Wise Giving Alliance accredited charities, the charities who have met all 20 of our BBB standards for charity accountability, who are working on this particular issue. So there's a whole list of them as well.
Well, I'm looking at give.org right now, and I don't see it on the homepage. Do you know where I can go to see that?
If you scroll down to news items.
Okay. Oh, yes. Recent articles, donation tips for tornado relief. I'm just going to click in there and look at this. Bennett is so knowledgeable. He's seen so much in his years of keeping an eye on charities and charitable giving. Oh, wow. Okay, so it does have a lot of tips here, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. So it says to look for appeal clarity.
Yeah. So definitely kind of when you're thinking of giving, especially in these situations, seek out appeals that are upfront and clear about what disaster relief services you're supporting. Because the more specific they are, the more you'll be able to know exactly that, they have a plan and they're going to be able to implement that plan.
I was watching the news today, and the spokesperson from the Red Cross was speaking about the lack of blood right now and appealing for donations of blood. And that just made me think about the Red Cross in general, and the other organizations that could be asking and soliciting donations for help here. But what struck me next then was the FEMA spokesperson that was there on the ground, who was the FEMA spokesperson had been spending the last couple of days with a bishop of the local United Methodist Church. And he was making a case for the faith-based missions to help, and observing that they all were helping and making, I guess, the case that we should support these faith-based missions also, because they were not only reaching out into the community, but they knew the community, they knew the people. So I thought that was very interesting too.
And I think that goes into, I guess, two of Bennett's tips. One is to give to experienced groups. So, supporting experienced organizations to stand ready to provide quick and effective assistance, and to be, cautious of organizations that form overnight in the wake of a disaster. So on one hand, you have the American Red Cross, that's an experienced organization that knows how to do this. But on the other hand, there's also the local organizations that are experienced and have the local knowledge, as you were saying, Elizabeth, about working in the community, through their faith-based initiatives or their nonprofit initiatives. So they have experience and they can reach the people in ways that that people need reaching.
Right. So the Red Cross spokeswoman made she made sure to know that 90% of the funds raised would go back into the community, and that only 10% would be for administrative costs. And that's a pretty high number, I think. I think that's good. But it's important to know, and this is one of Bennett's cautions, is to be aware that 100% claims are probably not realistic, that these organizations are incurring administrative and fundraising expenses, even if it's using other funds to cover those costs. But it's unlikely that 100% of donations will assist the relief victims, and that we should be very, very cautious about those claims.
Yeah, and exactly. And organizations who are familiar with doing this kind of work, they won't speak in hyperbole, right? They'll be realistic about it. Like you said with the Red Cross, we'll get 90% will go to programs and 10% will go to overhead. And large organizations like the Red Cross, they've got economies of scale, so they can support that kind of 90-10 breakdown. But be aware too that some of the smaller organizations, they might be paying a little more to overhead and fundraising. But don't think of that as wasted money. Think of it as money that goes and is invested in the organization, so that the organization can continue to grow and become stronger and find new donors and whatnot. And overheads are part of running an organization, and it enables the organization to work on the causes that they care about as well.
That's true. So there's so many different ways that we can look at a charity to determine the trustworthiness of it. And one of the best ways I know of is to jump over to the BBB Wise Giving Alliance's website, give.org. And there we list the charities that meet all 20 BBB standards for charity accountability. And one of those standards is the breakdown of the funds that go to for assistance versus administrative costs, and the transparency there. But I see, though, that there are some very specific ones that are assisting there in Kentucky, and the American Red Cross is right there at the top of the list. And you can click there and see the report of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance about the American Red Cross. I'm looking down here and seeing some pretty big names here of people who are jumping in to help. Yeah,
and absolutely. And I think what we're touching on also references another one of Bennett's points, that is, when you're able to rely on an expert opinion, because in the moment, trying to figure out, how an organization operates and how it spends its money and who's in charge of the organization, and do they have policies in place and whatnot. That's a lot to ask for one person that doesn't specialize in charity review. But to be able to go over and visit give.org and look up a charity, you automatically get an assessment by people who are basically experts in this, myself and my colleagues included. And we don't, just look at, fundraising and whatnot and the finances, but we really focus on 4 main areas. One is governance. Is the organization well run? Do they have policies in place, for accountabilities? Is the board, do they have proper oversight of the organization? Is the staffing, accountable and whatnot? The second area is, how does the organization measure its own work? Does it measure its own work, and does it work on kind of being strategic about improving year over year? Another area we look at that you mentioned, Elizabeth, is finances. How are the organization's finances put together? How much does it spend on programs versus administration versus fundraising? And we do have a standard there that says at least 65% of of an organization's yearly budget should go to programs. So there's a lot of room there. Some organizations spend up to 90%. Some organizations are closer to 70. But our sense is that at a very minimum, it should be 65%. And our reports actually report the numbers, so it shows all the information from the charities audit or 990, so you can see kind of how much is spent on each area, and we have the percentages as well. Finally, the fourth area that we look at for our reports is on the accuracy of fundraising appeals. So if charities are asking for matching funds, or if they're doing TV ads, or telemarketing and whatnot, we have a series of questions we asked about those. We have them send us examples of their appeals, and we review them for accuracy. And then we're able to report, whether their fundraising materials are accurate or not, and they meet those standards. So yeah, we really cover those four areas: governance, how the organization measures its own work. We look at its finances, and then we look at its fundraising practices.
Wow, that's a lot of work, but I think it's valuable information that you produce. Since we're sitting in the metaverse, having our little discussion, our little meetup, I want to talk a little bit about excuse me, I'm so sorry. I want to talk a little bit about Feed the Children, another one of the charities on our list. And the reason I want to just point them out is because they are accepting cryptocurrency. We have a page for them on our charity donation platform, givesafely.org. And I believe they accept charity or cryptocurrency on their website too. And they do an amazing job. And you can read their report right here on give.org's donation tips for tornado relief as well. But saying that, here we have how many? 20 organizations that have already jumped in and put a page on their websites that that state explicitly that they are participating in these tornado relief activities, and they are all part of the accredited charities of the BBB. And that's pretty amazing, and it gives us a lot of opportunities to give safely and give wisely when we look at these lists and when we look at Bennett's cautions.
Yeah, and it's really heartening to know that these organizations are so strong, but also nimble, that they can get to work right away, but then also communicate transparently and effectively with donors, because donors want to know. Okay, you say you're doing activities around the tornado relief. What are you doing? So that they have it as part of their DNA to kind of communicate this, this sort of information, in a clear and transparent way. I think is very admirable too. Yeah.
So one of the things that pops up after these kind of disasters is crowdfunding sites and pages. And I think that it's really, really important to understand that while crowdfunding can be a useful tool, that there's also a lot of dangers in it, especially when people are feeling emotional. And it's really good if you understand the project and you're giving to people that you know and you trust personally. But it's usually these crowdfunding sites don't do any vetting of the people who decide to post a page asking for assistance. So I think it's really, really important to do that vetting yourself. And remember too, that these individuals and these little groups that might pop up after a disaster like this are very likely, not likely, there's a good chance that they really, really are helping with it and stuff, but you just can't be sure enough. And especially if you're thinking of giving a considerable sum, please consider the fact that these established organizations have a better logistics and distribution system in place. And if you want to get very local, again, those faith-based organizations, and I'm seeing here that we have Feeding America, Kentucky's Heartland. That looks like a very promising place to give, to help, feed these people that don't even have a kitchen, and a lot of them don't even have a restaurant on the corner to go to for food or a supermarket anymore. I mean, this is just a tragedy.
And I think you bring up a great point. Definitely, there are some scams out there on crowdfunding, but there's a lot of folk who are, trying to do good, but might not have a full plan on, how to follow through and how to reach, communities that are going through this sort of, these sort of challenges and don't have the experience. So definitely, if there's someone on crowdfunding that's asking for help, and you know them personally, or the context, by all means support them. There's nothing better than one human helping another human directly. But yeah, if it's an appeal that you're not familiar with folk, especially outside of the area, thinking about going in and helping, but they don't really have a plan, they're not able to give specifics, definitely kind of take pause and really think it through that way. I think kind of related to this is another point that Bennett brings up, is to give money rather than goods. And that one made me pause and think for a while, because when you're imagining folk who are affected by hurricanes and they don't have their homes right now, and they may be staying somewhere and they need clothes and blankets and things like that, it feels very tangible to say, oh yeah, I'll go buy a blanket and give it. But on the other hand, what Bennett says is donate the money is usually the quickest way to help, and provides charities with flexibility to channel resources to impacted areas. So it may be that people don't need blankets. It may be that the Red Cross already has, sufficient blankets in the area, but what they really need is some other good. And we can't even imagine what that is. And let alone, if we, raise a lot of goods, how do we get them to that area? Will they be distributed efficiently? Whereas, the organizations, the religious organizations, the people in the local areas, the larger organizations like, Red Cross and Care USA, Feed the Children, Americans, Feeding America, Kentucky's Heartland. These are some of the ones on the list. They know kind of what the needs are, and they're able to they'll be able to use the money to buy those needs, buy goods to fill those needs, perhaps more efficiently than if we filled up a truck with donations and drove it down there. By the time we got there, they might not need what we're bringing, or they may have even larger needs.
That's a good explanation of it. I was just imagining myself buying something like, I don't know, maybe I would fill my Jeep up with toilet paper and drive it down to Kentucky, and think that I'm doing really, really a good deed. But when I get down there, road congestion and, who needs this? What am I going to do? Open the sunroof and start throwing toilet paper rolls out to people. That's not very helpful, and it's a very, very small impact. But if I were to give that same money to one of these organizations, that it could perhaps contribute to a truck full of paper goods that people might need, and they might get a good price with, because they
Right.
might actually be working with some corporations that are philanthropic and, donating things by truckloads, and they can go in and set things up and have a much better just distribution than I could ever think of. So I think I'm just going to stay out of the way and send down some crypto. I think that's the way to do it.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think about celebrity fundraisers? Oftentimes, just like the rest of us, when celebrities hear of a disaster and needs, they'll step up, and they have more voice in some cases than the rest of us, because they have more followers online, or, their name is better known, and they can galvanize support. Do you have any thoughts around kind of celebrity fundraisers?
I really appreciate it when somebody who has reached the status of being well known or a celebrity decides to use that platform for doing good things and for stepping up when the needs are greatest. That's very admirable. I think it's really important to just look at the organization that they're speaking on behalf and just use the same criteria, the same guidelines that we've just covered to look at that charity and organization, and look past the fame of the celebrity person who's
Right.
speaking on the behalf of that organization, because the celebrity themselves are doing a good thing by opening their mouths and bringing attention to the need. But look at the organization behind it for trustworthiness.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. If you were giving to an organization, you would try to see, what plans do they have? Do they have the capacity to, meet the needs and to meet their goals? So, same thing. I think a lot of us default to trusting a celebrity and say, hey, they're a public figure, they're doing it for the right reasons. Well, definitely, as Elizabeth just said, take that extra step and say, okay, you're going to fundraise this money. What's the next step? Are you going to support an organization? What sort of organization? Are you going to, worst case scenario, are you going to, like Elizabeth just said, is your celebrity plan to buy a truck and fill it with toilet paper and drive it down? Well, great intentions might not be the best and most efficient use of my donation. I'd look at, potentially another celebrity who's affiliated with, an organization that's going to, help them, get done, the goals that they set out.
Right. That is true. Yeah, I'm looking at some of the websites of these organizations that are accredited charities by the Better Business Bureau's Wise Giving Alliance. And some of them have some really good information, not just about donating, but even coping if you're down there, what to do afterwards with your losses and with the disaster that you have around, if your power's out, things like that. So that's another use that these charities can provide is information. And certainly people are looking for information because their lives have been turned upside down, and they need to anchor themselves with information so that they could, just decide, what do I do next? How do I do this? How do I cope? Yeah.
And we'll definitely post a link to the tips page. And note again, the tips page has a list of charities that are doing work, around the tornado relief, that are all verified, to meet the 20 BBB standards for charity accountability. So they're all accredited charities, they're all trustworthy charities. So there's a list that includes the link to the report on the charity, so you can trust and verify for yourself. But then, as Elizabeth said, it has a link to their tornado relief activities, including stuff that they're doing on the ground. And as Elizabeth pointed out, some of them actually have, tips for folk who are living in the affected areas as well.
And my next step, I think, might just need to be to do a home remodel and put these hurricane and tornado ties on all of the beams and joists in my house. I know it just sort of makes you a little bit concerned, doesn't it, when such a devastating event can happen. I look at these, I live in the city amongst a lot of very, very close homes, and decided at one point that I was immune from tornadoes and high wind damage. But looking at what this tornado did to whole cities, to warehouses, to business buildings, I'm like, oh dear. I think it's important for us to all realize that we're all vulnerable in some way or another, and that there may come a time that any one of us could find ourselves in need, and maybe we already have, and have been beneficiaries of other people's largesse. But it takes all of us working together to recover, even when we're far away from this disaster. The help we can provide, it needs to be a team and a community effort.
That's so beautifully said.
Yeah.
And I think it feels good to be able to provide those resources, and that we have the relationships with these charities where we can make the list and put the tips together and whatnot, as an organization doing our part that way. But yeah, beautifully said. Thank you, Lizzie.
You're welcome. And I think you and I will pick this conversation up, hopefully with a more positive tone than tornado damage, next week in our metaverse headquarters. So stay tuned.
See you next week in Crypto Voxels.
Yeah.